Mic check, mad doggy dog in the building for the part two. Yeah, I started ended up going on a long one, so I thought I'd split these up. So we've heard the analysis around the gloves are off and how that went. We've heard the analysis around fight tactics in terms of all the tangible aspects. That's a little bit uh for the boxing purists out there. I thought I'd also talk about the intangibles as well, right? So if you're new to the sport, this is the kind of thing that can help bring you in, right? Um, and then when you're in, you're hooked. Do you know what I mean? It's a bit like heroin. Not that I've got any experience much anymore. But anyway, back to Eubank Smith. I feel like the biggest intangible here is going to be what is Eubank going to fight like? Okay? Because at this moment in time, we've only ever seen him fight once under his current trainer, Roy Jones Jr., generational legend of the 90s. But in that fight, he, like, okay, it's one thing to take things from another fighter, especially a legendary fighter at that. But he fought literally like he thought he was Roy Jones. And for me, that's a big intangible in Smith's favor because, like, this is an X factor. This isn't Britain's Got Talent. This isn't like The Voice. This is none of those things, man. Simon Cowell is not in the building. And as a boxer, that's a red flag for me around Chris Eubank Jr. It always has been. When he first came into the sport, he was trying to be a Chris Eubank senior impersonator, coming in with all that bullshit, right? And he can say, all right, that's my dad, he's a legend in the sport, paying homage, all that kind of good stuff. But then when he started getting cooked for it, he had no style at all. He was just brawling. And then that didn't work against Saunders. That didn't work against Groves. He got fists up. Yeah. And then he's trying to have a real trainer. He's trying to learn real skills, but the likes of Adam Smith, but that didn't work out because him and his dad, they're very special, eccentric individuals. And at this point, from what we saw in the last fight against Liam Williams, he was literally fighting like a fucking impersonator, like a tribute act. And that's some serious mental ill. I was about to get a little bit overexcited there. I was gonna say mental illness, but that's some mental insecurity I feel. Like, what is this? Is this because your dad was such a legend and then you wanted to step out of his shadow? So the only person that you could then feel worthy enough was the man that your dad never really wanted to fight. Your dad said it himself. He never wanted to go to America and fight Roy. Roy was on those roids. I don't blame Chris Eubank for that. But, you know, is this just like almost like some kind of psychological thing where he likes to be modeled upon somebody, right? First it was his dad, and then he was getting cooked for that, so he went and found somebody who was even bigger legend, and it's almost like a fear to be oneself, right? Um, and the vulnerability that comes with that, you know. How much of a difference would it make in the fight? Well, we saw against Liam Williams that he was doing really well, mimicking Roy's left hook and quick jab and the low hands and the head movement and all the footwork and all of that was beautiful, right? For the first couple of rounds, and he dropped Liam Smith 3 times in the first 2 rounds. But then when he couldn't get rid of Liam Smith, he didn't know what to do. He looked out of ideas. He looked like a lost puppy in the woods. And that ended up turning into a real scruffy, tough affair. I mean, it didn't get reflected on the judges' cards, but he ended up making a meal of that fight, right? And if that happens against Liam Smith, who's a better fighter, Liam Smith also fought Liam Williams and beat him twice very convincingly, right? If that happens against Liam Smith, if he gets lost in his own mind and he doesn't know what he's trying to do and he can't remember, it's almost like if you rap or if you are a singer or something, at some point you need to come up with your own bars. You need to have something going on between your ears, which is your own. Because when to quote Mike Tyson, everyone's got a plan till you get punched in the face. And my worry is that when Chris Eubank gets punched in the face, which he will, yeah, it's difficult, to keep up the act almost, right? So that's a big intangible. Liam Smith, he's been fighting the same way his whole career. It's taken him to a world title. It's taken him to big unification fights, which he didn't necessarily come out on top on, but he can be trusted to execute his game plan, right? So I think the intangibles in many ways go in Liam Smith's favor, primarily for that reason. The other thing that we don't necessarily know is how is Liam Smith going to deal with the weight, right? Liam Smith, we've spoken about before, he's for his whole career at 154. He's going to step up to 160. He feels like somebody who could fill into the weight class. He's a very tall fighter. If you actually look at the weigh-in when Liam Smith fought Canelo, he actually looked like the bigger man. Now, Canelo, in them days, he was a bit of a sniff test with the drug. Yeah, he smells all right. He's fine. He's fine. He's not taking nothing. But in the ring, Canelo was huge. But Smith is very tall for the weight class. So I feel like, could he get another lease of life? Could he have a lot more durability, a lot more punch power, a lot more energy, right? Fighting at 160. We've seen that before with fighters. For me, the classic example was Miguel Cotto, who was boiling himself down to 140. He had his last fight at 140 against Paulie Malignaggi. Didn't drink water the whole fight week was the rumor. And as soon as he stepped up against, I think his first fight was a very good Carlos Quintana, who was a world champion at the time, absolutely iced Carlos Quintana, folded him like a deck chair in 5 rounds, right? And that first fight, when you step up, when you've been boiling yourself down your whole career, you can look as good as always. Now, obviously, at that point, there's a plateau. You don't necessarily maintain that because you end up living a lifestyle where you get used to that higher weight class. But, again, it's an intangible. It could go in Liam Smith's favor. It could make him more durable, as I say, as well as obviously it being somewhat of a negative because Eubank's the bigger man. He's fought bigger guys, right? So listen, we're going to see what happens. I think another intangible is going to be what kind of advice do they get from the corner, right? Because Liam Williams, he's been fighting with this coach, I think Jason McNally, for a while now. And aside from that screw job in Russia, he's been working well, and he seems comfortable with that coach. And the challenge with Roy Jones is I've never actually seen Roy Jones improve a fighter, right? When he's been working with Jean Pascal, I haven't seen nothing impressive in the corner, right? I believe Pascal actually had a losing record under Roy Jones. So we don't necessarily know whether Roy's capable of giving people advice. And I think at a general level, when you're such a talented individual in your given domain, you're not necessarily a good coach, right? If anything, it's like people say, the best players aren't always great managers, best managers aren't always great players. You see that so much in football, right? The most decorated coaches, aside from maybe a Zidane, right? They didn't make it as elite players themselves. Because if you're an elite fighter, so much of what you're doing is due to your genetics. So you've never necessarily needed to climb that mountain, right, with shitty genetics to know everything that it takes, to know every dirty trick in the book to pull out the bag, because you spent most of your career at the top of that mountain. You didn't, for you to, the climb was the easy part, right? It was tough to stay there, but someone just like had to, climb and made it midway or made it 90% there and then fall back down and then come up with another strategy to give it another go. If you're not as genetically gifted, if you haven't spent so much time at the top of the sport, right, you know every dirty trick to get every dirty advantage. And that's why, the Freddie Roaches, the Adam Booths, the Manny Stewarts, like some of the most decorated coaches, they were average fighters, right? So that's a very long way of saying that I don't really rate Roy Jones to give good advice. And especially if it's not going Chris Eubank's way, that could be an intangible in Liam Smith's favor. Personally, I think if it throws down and Eubank starts taking heavy fire, the best thing that he can do is to just go back to his old self, right? Just forget about the whole Roy Jones, forget about circling on the back foot, forget about just sticking that left hand in his face and, the head movement and all. Forget about all that. Two-fisted combinations. Two-fisted combination. If he fights the way he fought against who's that geezer? Gary Spike O'Sullivan, right? I think that was on the Anthony Joshua versus Dillian White undercard. I was at that fight. If he fights the way he did against Spike O'Sullivan or the way he fought against Anthony Yildirim, right? which are come forward fighters, they like to come forward and have a go. For me, the old school Eubank was probably the best way to inflict damage upon Liam Smith. Now, it seems like Chris Eubank is more about self-preservation at this point, right? It's not about necessarily being exciting and getting dudes out of there in two-fist combination. It's about how can you win fights without taking any damage. And for those of you that watch the Diary of a CEO podcast, I thought it was real interesting how Chris Eubank actually went out of his way to talk about how he's he's concerned. He's concerned about his mental health, his cognitive health. He's downloaded an app to help him with his cognition and his memory. He starts noticing he's losing words. I know the feeling. I don't even fight, but you know what I mean? That's a different story. But sometimes people ask him basic questions and it takes them time to recall, right? The speed of recall isn't quite there. So he's definitely, to be saying that out loud as a fighter is a dangerous path to go down, right? First of all, but he's definitely in a mindset, and I think it correlates with the coach that he's chosen, that is very much about self-preservation. Roy Jones, after he got knocked out by Antonio Tarver in the second round, you never saw Roy take chances after that, right? He was very much about how can I fight and stay on the back foot. Ironically, he didn't do a good job of that. He got knocked out a million times after that, right? But we'll see on the night. But those are the intangibles that I'm seeing. Now, if we look at what happens for the winner and the loser, right? I think most probabilistic will be Eubank wins. I think if it's a close fight, this is a fight they could do again because, you know, Chris Eubank, I don't think he's any great rush to go to America and take on a Charlo or take on, you know, Demetrius Andrade. Let's see, who are the champions at 160, right? Middleweight world champions. I should normally have this shit off the top, but you know what I mean? I'm probably suffering from a bit of the Eubanks at the moment. I ain't really got that instant recall. But yeah, if we look at the champions at middleweight, you got Charlo, you got Golovkin holding two of the belts. Obviously, that was a non-title fight against Alvarez. Could he fight Golovkin? Maybe. I don't know. I don't know, to be honest with you, whether that fight can be made or whether he's just using his name. Because to bring Golovkin over here would take a lot of money, right? A lot of money. He just made serious wonga on his DAZN contract, yeah, and fought against Canelo. Golovkin's chilling, man. He's chilling. Like, does he need Eubank? He'll take it if it's big dough, but Eubank's proven that, I mean, tough as you like, tough as a $2 steak, tough as a pair of Timberlands in that negotiating room, yeah. So does that fight necessarily happen? I don't know, right? Is he going to step up and fight a Canelo? Is he going to fight a Jamal Charlo at 160? He could have done that when he was on PBC with Al Heyman, right? He didn't do it then. Why should we believe he's going to do it now, right? So for me, I think if it's a close fight, you could very, very, very likely see the rematch. Okay, these guys, two British fighters. We've seen with Groves Froch. Okay, what can happen if there's a controversial fight? They can do it again. I think if he loses, it will definitely be a rematch. Yeah, you can bank on that. It's been mentioned in the press conferences that Kalle Sauerland has got that locked in. You know, they've got the rematch guaranteed if Smith wins. Now, so we know what's going to happen if that's the scenario. If Smith loses, right, which is probably most probable, what does he go on to do? He's getting paid a lot of money. I don't think, to be honest with you, that he'll want to try and climb up the mountain at 154. You got some dogs in that division, man. You don't want to then go see, you know what I mean, Jamel. Let's talk of like Spence and Crawford moving up. Obviously, we spoke it. Check out the next video around Spence versus Thurman. Tim Tszyu, those guys, man, that's long for Liam Smith, man. There's no big paydays there. He's not going to get Kell Brook out. So I think it's probably retirement, or maybe he fights a final fight in Liverpool at the Echo against a decent-ish kind of British level fighter, just to call it a night. So that's what I think both fighters are going. We're going to do a next video during fight week to cover the press conferences and the weigh-in, all them kind of thing there. So check that out. If you haven't seen the first video, check out the first video as well. Peace.